to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. And I extend those respects to any elders joining us here today. Today, we're joined by Amanda Hampson. She grew up in rural New Zealand, where I'm meeting a lot of writers who've come from New Zealand, so there must be something in the water there. She spent her early 20s travelling and finally settling in Australia in 1979, where she lives on Sydney's northern beaches. She has been writing professionally for more than 20 years and is the author of 2 non-fiction books, numerous articles and novels, The Olive Sisters, 2 for the Road, The French Perfumer, The Yellow Villa, and 60 Summers. But today we're here because she's got this lovely, which way am I going to go? Lovely new book called Lovebirds out now. And I've had the delight of reading that book. And as you'll see from my questions, it's taken me ups and downs, highs and lows, laugh out loud moments, and brought me to tears. So I'm going to now welcome you, Amanda.
Thank you for having me, Kathy. It's nice to be here.
Oh, it's so lovely that we've got the power of Zoom, so we don't even have to leave our houses some days. I do miss the in-person ones, but we will get back to those eventually, I feel. I like to start right at the very beginning of the story. Your protagonist, Liz, is returning to her hometown, Nullarborough, and this visit is the preface for the events which unfold in Lovebirds. Who is Liz and what is so significant about this visit for her?
Well, in creating the character of Liz or Elizabeth, I suppose I was really looking closely at women of my generation, the now very discredited baby boomers. And I guess there's this thing that when we're young, we think we'll always be young and old people were always old. And then suddenly the children of the 60s, you know, I was a teenager in the 60s when we owned the world, we were the youthquake. Suddenly we are those older people. And there's a sense that people think that you have done nothing with your life, that you have always been like this. There's also this kind of habit of older people to be a little bit grumpy or a bit taciturn or dismissive. And so I thought it'd be interesting to take a character and have the reader form a certain opinion of her as being just a grumpy old boomer, and then start to unpeel the layers of her life. So we kind of see, because we go back to the 60s and the 70s and we see the formative times of her life, and we start to see a very, very different person emerge, a person who was actually very determined, very stoic, and much more loving than was immediately obvious. So in a way, she is an every woman of our generation, and somebody I feel I can write confidently about, in the sense that when you are writing from my advanced years, I'm in my mid-60s, you were, yes, you have to research and confirm things, but you were there so that you can draw from thousands of different memories and draw lots and lots of strands and threads together to make the story seem authentic.
So is there a little bit of Liz in you?
No, I'm not grumpy. No. I'm actually a super cheerful, chatty person. I think I was probably in some ways channeling the opposite of myself, because I'm very open to ideas. I'm a great champion of millennials. I'm a very progressive thinker. So it was really looking at the opposite of that, of somebody who's a little bit stuck in, oh, this is the way it was, that type of thinking. Yeah.
And so Liz's role when she was working, she's now retired, and I'm deliberately not talking about the plot too much because there is a lot of plot work that would be spoilers if you haven't already read it. But Liz's role when she was working was in the juvenile justice system, so that to me screams of being very modern as well too. And you see when she's dealing with her grandson Zach, the very modern Liz that's there. Is is she always like forward thinking?
Oh, look, I think she is stuck in some spots. I think what happens for a lot of people, there's some things that they are progressive in, and there's some things that they don't realize they're stuck in. And I hear those in conversations with people of my age, and I just go, okay, that idea is 30 years out of date. And they're like, what? Because when older people start to deal a lot with older people, they are in this other bubble. And, you know, I said to a friend the other day something about the gender neutral pronoun and explained what it was. And she was like, I had no idea. I was like, where have you been? So I think there are these sort of puddles of illumination. And then there are other parts of people's lives that they are not necessarily up to date with. So her career in juvenile justice went over about 30 years. So there are some things that she is kind of a little bit stuck in that and maybe wasn't keeping up in her career. But she was very progressive in the beginning. But also, you know, that kind of wears out. And we see that in our politicians now. You can see politicians that were once very progressive now kind of mired in the past type of thing.
Yeah, and I'm going to talk about settings because a lot of the settings are in the past, but also when they go on a road trip, which is hilarious, some of those aspects of the road trip. But the setting in Nullarborough, the corner shop, the shop, well, I call it a corner shop, but the shop that Liz's parents owned, to me, that took me back to my childhood in Dubbo. My cousin's family owned the corner shop, and it was like being there. How important were the settings, and how did you decide on the various settings that you chose?
Well, looking at the two layers of the book, on one hand, we've got the contemporary story where Elizabeth is kind of struggling with these issues with her being a little bit out of kilter with her family and then taking charge of Zach and going on the road. And as we physically progress forward in that, we're going back to these periods in her life. So the 60s when she was a child. So what I really draw on with that is, you know, so she was a new girl at school. Her parents moved around. Now, I moved around a fair bit in primary school. So while that was all fiction, the feeling of it came from my sense of displacement, particularly if you're a shy child and you move from school to school, you start to give up making friends because it's so hard to do, and then you have to, and heartbreaking to leave. And so that was fun to look at the games we used to play. I mean, skipping was huge, those kind of, and it was always the boys played this and the girls played that. The kind of, I guess, disinterest that teachers had in us then. You know, I went to a 2-room school and there were 2 teachers and they left the school during lunch. They used to just go home and have their lunch. And we used to run riot. So then we go to, in another part, to the Easter show. So that was growing up in New Zealand. We used to actually go to the Waikato show, which was the same sort of thing. So for me, it's connecting with the reader, reminding the reader of those smells and the sounds, and because they are the things, it's the sensual elements, even though it's written in words, that take you back and take you into the character's life, I guess, by remembering when you experience those things.
That's very, very well written, I must say. While on the surface, this novel is a love story between Liz and Ray. However, it's brilliantly multifaceted in terms of themes, including the Vietnam War, family dynamics, and the justice system, which we've touched on already. How did you manage to weave these so seamlessly into the structure of the novel?
Oh, God, that's a really good question. Look, I suppose what you see when you get older is that life is all these kind of tangled webs that come together, and that we have these influences in our lives that we may not be very aware of at the time. But certainly when I was a teenager, the anger of young people and the fear of conscription was very vivid. So Elizabeth is a couple of years older than me because the whole thing began to wind down in the early 70s. But certainly when I was at parties as a teenager, the conversation was how to escape from conscription, how to, you know, these kind of things. And of course, that has touched thousands of lives. And it's evident now that that has had a knock-on effect to other generations, that trauma and PTSD is in the DNA. So that, I guess, it's very hard to explain how these things come together, except that my mind is like a great messy compost heap that has all of these seeds in it. And as you're writing something, you have the sense of, oh, I know something about this, and something springs up, and then you follow that trail, and then you manage to work it in. I thought it would be interesting for Elizabeth to work in the justice system. One of the things, I'll tell you, the cheat sheet of authors is that you generally try to give people careers that you have some ability to drive someone nuts asking them questions about it. So I would not be making someone a heart surgeon, because I don't know any heart surgeons. But my sister-in-law, my ex-sister-in-law, she works in the justice system. I've always found her work very, very interesting. And so I thought, okay, I can ask her all of these questions. I can follow her career. But I thought it was an interesting juxtaposition against, now we find that Elizabeth's own family are coming into the justice system, which is quite a humiliating experience for anybody who works in it. So yeah, it's really just a matter of just bringing those things together. I can't explain it. It's just magic, really.
It's just
the dark magic of writing.
Well, you've done it really well.
Thank you.
So in terms of that, was there much other research that you did for those themes?
Look, it's interesting because although the Vietnam War is not featured, we don't follow Ray, we don't really know what happened to him apart from one conversation when he alludes to trauma that he suffered. I read about 5 books about the Vietnam War. Sometimes I just had to flip the pages because people's experiences were so distressing. But that again is all about adding material to the compost heap. It's really about saying, how would this man respond to this environment, these kind of experiences? Now, one star of the show that we haven't mentioned yet, but I think that we can let our friends in on that, is that the star of the show is Eric the Budgie.
That was my next question.
I don't know anything about budgies. I don't have a budgie. I've never had a budgie. So I had to read a book about budgies. I had to watch YouTube videos of budgies and how they do things and how, what their body language is, so to speak. And I think that for me, all of that kind of thing is interesting. I am an autodidact. I left school at 16. I haven't been to university, but I have a real hunger for knowledge and for learning things. And it doesn't really seem to matter what it is. I'm just really, okay, I've got to make this character of the Budgie very authentic. So now I need to know everything about this. Now, if you ask me in 2 years' time about budgies, all gone. It's just completely gone. Something new will be there.
And yeah, Eric is the comic relief. He's also a good sounding board and balances some of those more intense storylines. So I was going to ask you about how you managed to get such a good character, but you've answered it already. It's
yeah,
fabulous.
I think Eric, he just was fun. That was his exact role in it, because we meet Elizabeth when she's going to her friend's funeral, her best friend, and So that could be a bit, we can see she's a bit out of kilter with a lot of the people there. The purpose of that, those couple of chapters, is for us to start to see, oh, she's being asked about her husband, what's happened to him. Oh, you know, we're getting these little hints of her life, but then to bring Eric into it, you have, as you say, the comic relief, and he's able to fly in and out the various scenes and say things that the fact that she ends up having to take him to the funeral obviously is going to put a completely different complexion on the whole affair.
Yeah, and he really is. I like the connection that Zach builds, and Zach is Liz's grandson. I like the connection that Zach builds with Eric and calls him Uncle Eric, and really becomes quite attached to him. And that's good for anyone who knows teenage boys, that they don't talk a lot. So if they've got someone that they can talk to like that and connect with, I think it's a great tool that you've used there for that. Speaking of Zach, he is such a likable kid. He's navigating through life through some tough blows, some harsh realities lately, and he builds that strong relationship with both Liz and Eric in the story. But I felt Liz's frustrations at his behaviour in the early stages of the book. And how did you turn that relationship around?
Well, anybody who has had a 15-year-old son will know the frustrations. And I think one of my favourite, I loved writing the conversations between the two of them. It was fun reducing all of Zach's dialogue to basically a word or two. And at one point where he runs away into the night and gets into all kinds of trouble and is chased by Eshays, she says, I don't know why you do things. I don't know why you do these things. And he says, neither. And I think that encapsulates the thinking of a 15-year-old boy. So while she's had two sons of her own, so she's very aware that they have a high, you know, they do risky things. They don't think things through. They compartmentalize things, and you know, but they are also suffering. You know, there's this massive surge of testosterone making their brain all blurry, and so because she's lost his trust as a result being estranged from his mother for a year, she is put on the back foot to work. She has to work her way back to win his trust. And to a large degree, as you'll see from that time where I think we can say they get trapped behind a sofa by a man with a gun. I don't think that's giving away too much. The level field, the playing field becomes a little bit more level, where she starts to say to him, because he's a Call of Duty expert, oh, what do we do now? And he says, well, you're always saying you're in charge. Let's see what you got. So, you know, they start to have this more yin and yang thing happening, and it levels out from there.
Yeah, it's a beautiful, beautiful relationship to watch blossom. But of course, those relationships are two-way, and Zach is also learning to live with his nana, who he hasn't had much contact with. I particularly like the image of her trying to swat the blowfly in the Dancing Queen chapter. And do you want to just, for those, I don't know if you guys have read the book, but for those who haven't read the book, can you explain that scene to them?
Well, I have to say that that scene was inspired by a fly. And I thought, isn't it interesting that when you if you go and lie down and have a little nap, if there's one fly in the house, it will come in and land on your leg. And then it won't go away. It'll land on the other leg like that. So Elizabeth is at home and she lies, it's a very hot afternoon. Zach's at school and she lies on the bed and this fly lands on her and lands on the other leg. And she just becomes more and more frustrated. And, you know, she's just wearing underwear and a t-shirt, no bra. And so in the end, she just storms out after the fly and is talking to the fly, and then Eric's getting involved, and she gets a newspaper and she leaps in the air and hits this fly and then nearly falls over, but manages to recover herself in a sort of, Olympic gymnast way, and turns around to find that Zach and his friends are standing just in silent horror watching this whole episode play out. So I really like these. And to me, this is what happens in life. You start to do something that's quite ordinary. And then once you take it to the nth degree and have to explain it to somebody, you just feel so ridiculous. So again, this is another kind of leveling of their relationship.
And it certainly opened the dialogue between Zach and his mum and Liz. So I thought that was really good because it opened up that conversation about what's wrong with Nana.
Yeah.
This book made me feel I became really invested in the outcome, and I laughed at the crazy antics of the characters, particularly the animal characters. So you have obviously Eric, but you also have the crazy goat as well too. It's a real roller coaster of emotions. Is there a skill or a technique that you use to bring such emotion to your stories?
I suppose the tool is empathy. It's really not that I empathize with goats. I have actually owned a couple of goats, so I was easily able to write Vladimir, because goats are really annoying. They're always doing something that's the complete opposite of what they should be doing. I think just really trying to inhabit my characters and have a very strong sense of what the situation may be for them, what they may be feeling, and trying to write that in the most simple way possible. That's not sentimental. That's not. Somebody sent me an email saying that they'd read it and they loved the book, but she said, I wanted to be told what to think about these characters, and I was quite dismayed that I wasn't. That is just not my style at all. I would never explain, this is who this person is and this is how you should feel about it. I just want them to speak, to act. You make your own decisions. And I think in that way, the reader comes to empathize with fictional characters.
And empathize, I did, very much so. And you do have some characters in there that you don't find out very much about. So you've got obviously Tom and Danny, who are Liz's kids. So you don't find out much about them. You don't find out much about Ray, except for in his younger years. And there's that real sense of intrigue and mystery and what's gone on in this family that they've ended up at this point in time. So I actually had a question of like, what's next, or what's next for Liz? And that's actually one of the book club questions as well too. And is that coming down to the reader then takes on what they think happens?
Yeah, see, I sort of feel that a book, it's a little bit like, imagine all the characters are there on the stage at a particular time of their life, and the curtain opens and we see their story and the curtain closes, but they go on with their lives. And I feel as though this book is about the obstacles that Liz has got over, many of which were created by herself. And now she goes on to live, I suppose, a wider life, a bigger life than she has, that she's not as constrained by these constraints that she put on herself at the beginning of the book.
And she does put constraints on herself in terms of her relationship with Ray is obviously it's absolutely beautiful relationship. And I think there is a question that's come through on the booking sheet about love, and what really is love. Is it more a verb than a feeling? And will it be sort of just, is marriage what defines love, or love defines marriage? So with their relationship, how do you feel that worked for them?
Well, I think absolutely love is a verb, because, you can say, I mean, the word love is used very willy-nilly now. That I blame the Americans for that, saying love you to everyone, love you, love you. But, when you have children, you realize that you have to do lots and lots of things because you love them, that involve them being annoyed or angry with you. And that just goes on forever. So I think that is something that you have to put into action. You have to show that, because otherwise, particularly in a relationship, it's just romance. And I don't think romance, that's a very superficial part of it. And, it is not going to take you very far in a marriage. So I really wanted to show a marriage that has this really, really deep love that is, it's just like a rock. It can't be changed. Nothing can change it. The love that they have for each other. Marriage, I mean, that's just an institution. I don't think doesn't make any difference really, one way or the other.
And you see Liz really demonstrating her love of Ray in her efforts to bring Ray home. Not just on one occasion, but a couple of occasions. So to me, that is the action of love that
Yes.
she's working on there. Nicole has asked, how long are your novels? So I'm assuming, like, we can see how long the novel is. So I'm assuming that means how long does it take you to write your novels, and how do you find adequate focus and discipline to write books?
With great difficulty. I don't think anybody finds it easy. In terms of, so how long is, I have written books in a year, but I just don't find that long enough. More like 18 months to 2 years is a good time. If, Nicole, you're asking about the length of the book, I aim for about 95,000 words. Discipline, yeah, look, I think the key to it is to write every day, to try and do a word count every day, to do 500 words every day. It keeps you in the story. So when you're not actually at the computer, you're thinking about it. It's working in the background. But I use a Pomodoro app on my computer. So when I've trained myself that when I have my coffee in the morning, I have to be at my work then. So I cannot have the coffee just sitting out on my balcony enjoying myself. No, I'd have my coffee. I put on Pomodoro. So I do 40-minute sprints and a 15-minute break because, as we know, sitting is the new smoking. And in that 15-minute break, I do the housework. If you try to do the housework before you sit down and work, you will never finish a book. It will just not happen because there's always something new to do. But yeah, I will literally get the bing and I get up and I unload the dishwasher and I lower it again. Boom, down again. It's like that. I'm trained like a puppy.
Because you have written quite a few books now.
Yes.
So do you find with being absorbed in the book, while you're working on it, do you find that you're quite often thinking about it as you do other things?
Oh, absolutely. And it's quite interesting that you can be watching something on television and at the same time, some thoughts are running interference that have nothing to do with the show. Or it can be distracting if somebody's talking to you, concentrating on them, and then something triggers there and you can't, then I just don't hear anything they say after that because I can only think about so many things at the same time. Yeah, so I think staying in the story is the important part. The book I'm working on at the moment, I'm sort of hoping I can make it into a series, but it's set in 1965 in the garment industry in Surrey Hills. So we're back to the 60s, which is, lots of people really love to be in the 60s. And it's about 4 tea ladies who get together to solve a crime. So it's a bit of a whodunit. And so that can be quite testing because you have to kind of keep throwing grenades in your own path and then working out how it got there and what's going to happen next. And But I also like to have my kind of trademark, character development. So, because the relationship between these four tea ladies is quite funny. They're quite a little group with their own kind of conflicts in their own little world. So, so look, it's fun. If I didn't like writing, I just wouldn't do it.
It sounds absolutely fun. And you've been doing it for quite a while now, so you've got quite a lot of skill, and you do have discipline because you follow that. And that's what I've heard talking to lots of different authors, is that writing every day is really the key to getting it done.
Absolutely, yeah.
You can't edit something that's not written.
Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah. So I'm conscious, Daniel and Nicole, did you have any questions? You can unmute and ask if you would like. Okay. All right. How about, would you like to read a section of your book? Have you got a bit there that you like to read?
Well, probably from the beginning might be helpful. Do you think just start at the beginning?
Yeah, I think so. I was thinking the first page kind of area was really interesting, and it kind of sets the scene if you haven't read it already.
Okay, cool. So the first chapter is called Pretty Boy. Her bag was packed, but still she resisted leaving. She glanced around the kitchen for anything left undone. No dishes in the sink, benches wiped clean, plants watered, not a single item out of place, and it calmed her to see everything in order. She dreaded this journey, knowing that when she arrived in Nullarborough, there would be no Ginny coming out into the veranda, her arms wide for a welcoming hug. No sitting together in the sunroom, talking and laughing over a bottle of Shiraz as the sun dipped behind the hills and shadows crept across the vineyard. No Ginny at all. Elizabeth pulled herself back to the task of departure. I'm on top of this now, she informed Eric, nearly ready to go. Eric made no comment. He'd been subdued for the last couple of days, which was most unlike his usual chatty self. He'd been the only witness to Elizabeth's gusts of furious tears as she railed against the world and all the dreadful people who survived, while beautiful souls like Ginny were taken early. But in his silence, Elizabeth sensed a quiet empathy. He was giving her space to grieve. So Eric, of course, is the Budgie.
Yeah, I liked that when I first read that. I was thinking, who's this Eric? Yeah. Like, he's very understanding.
Daniel and Nicole now know who Eric is. Yes, I wanted to go, I think I go a full 2 pages having the reader think, oh, she's got this really quiet, dull husband. And then she goes over and Eric hops on her finger. So you get that little twist there.
Yeah. And of course, you're introduced to Ginny as well, which we haven't spoken much about Ginny, because she's such an important person in Liz's life, and it really is Ginny, what happens to Ginny that makes the start of the whole story. Can you explain about their friendship?
Well, I feel as though that at this time of life, I have friends that I have known, well, since school, since high school, people I've known for 40 years, and all the things that we've been through together. And those friends are literally irreplaceable. I have lots of friends I've met in the last 10 years and 20 years, but it's not the same as those old friends. And so I felt for her to lose that dear friend that she's known since she was 10, who she can completely be herself with, would be a catalyst. And the fact that Ginny leaves a letter for her to say, look, I haven't agreed with some of the things you've done and the way you've handled your relationships, but I loved you too much to say it. But now you need to go and mend your family, would be, there is just no way she wouldn't act on that letter. That would be so significant for her because she trusted Ginny so much, and Ginny would never say anything that was not in Elizabeth's best interest. So that seemed, that kind of loss, taking a character from the loss to finding this new path is really what that structure, I guess, is about.
Yeah, because it does start with a really huge loss, but then obviously she gets so much gain from the actions that she moves on with as a result of that letter. Though I do, and I don't want to, I'm very conscious not to give out too many spoilers, but I'm very conscious that part of that letter is unresolved at the end of it. But I like that she keeps her own. She doesn't take all of what's said on board. Let's just put it like that. She doesn't take everything on board, and she still keeps her own little feistiness in her as well too, because she does come across as, particularly when she's younger, as quite feisty, and then on the road trip she can be quite feisty as well too. So she's not a quiet little hideaway character.
No, I think, but often as teenagers and young women, particularly of that generation, it was made very clear. Most of us had quite disciplinarian fathers, and it was made very clear to us that there were rules to be followed. And certainly when I was growing up, one of the cardinal sins of children, young people, was showing off. So there's this, the rules and the culture that formed women of our generation were, you should be decorative, you should be, but, not too intelligent. You won't find a husband if you go around being intelligent. All of these kind of things were really a very disingenuous soup that we grew up with, I guess. So she is quite passive in the way that she follows Ray when she's young, but gradually she has to gather her strength. She doesn't have any choice. So, and I think that's very, very common for women of our generation, particularly with strict fathers. You didn't put a foot out of line or trouble.
I have to say, like, I was talking to my mum the other day about this book, because she's a child of the 60s in London, and a lot of it was like, I could picture my mum doing a lot of the things that happen in the stories. And sorry, Mum, but it really resonated that this was the backdrop of that time. There was the Vietnam War going on. There was lots of changes in society and expectations, and for Liz to jump out the window and take a risk is a really, really brave thing to do. And you see her just jumping in the car and driving off north as well too on the road trip with Zach, which is an incredibly brave thing to do.
Although we did used to jump out windows quite a lot in the 60s. I can remember being at a beach place with a couple of friends in a car, and we went around and picked up kids who were jumping out of windows, and then we'd go to a happening with a rock band. And then just get back in the windows. Their parents never knew they were out.
Yeah, I've got a funny feeling that jumping out of windows was not unique to that era.
No. Exactly.
I think that's the thing, is that kids will always be kids and teenagers will always be teenagers. And even though as you get older, you don't necessarily connect with teenagers so much, but from your memory, you can remember those feelings. And I think that's the empathy that you were talking about.
Oh, look, I think parents are more permissive and more understanding then. Our parents got the 60s was such a shock for them because everything changed overnight, and we embraced something that was completely foreign to them. I can remember going out wearing something I thought was rather fabulous, and my father saying, "I can see the crutch of your undies in that dress." So, the music, everything about it was very confronting to our parents. So most of us led quite secret lives. We had to protect them from what was really going on in the world, whereas I think parents are a bit more cluey these days. Some of them, yeah.
Okay, well, I think that's pretty much it. I'm just seeing if there was any more questions that I had. I'm very conscious not to talk about Ray. It is the hook that keeps you involved. So remember that. And how important is a hook in your stories so that it keeps you wanting more?
Well, I think some well-known writer said, you need to make every character want something. And so that is the hook. It's the foreshadowing. It's the something's going to happen. It needs to be, even if it's a letter you're waiting to be opened, there needs to be something. And, you can see this very clearly if you're talking to a friend. Some people tell stories that have this mounting pressure, and then this happened and then that happened. And some people tell stories that just flatline, and you can feel yourself losing interest and coming back in, and then it's really just using that kind of hierarchy of the story to keep it interesting. I've got a question from Daniel. You mentioned aspects of the story involving the juvenile justice system with the family or members of the family having a brush in that humiliating institution. Is this connected to the extent of Zach's recklessness or a greater community problem? You ask very complex and interesting questions, Daniel. I guess where I say humiliating, I talked to my sister-in-law about what would happen, how it would be if you worked in the justice system and a family member ended up in prison. And she said, well, look, it does happen, but it is a problem because, in fact, you as that worker have access to files and records, and you have to declare that your family member is in the justice system. Because there can be a conflict of interest there. And it's also, you would imagine that somebody working in that system would have been able to avoid that, but not always. Zach's recklessness I see as part and parcel of 15-year-old boys, but also something has happened in his family that has made him kind of throw caution out the window. And as often happens for teenagers, something happens here, their parents break up, something else happens, and that plays out in just crazy behavior. Is it a greater community problem? Well, look, where I live, it is a community problem because I live in quite an affluent suburb, beach suburb, Avalon, and there are a lot of kids out in the night, a lot. And I don't know if their parents know where they are, whether they can control that, but certainly there are a lot of things happen. At least once a week, part of our hose gets cut off in our block. I don't know what that's for. I don't know why they don't take their parents' hoses, but yeah, there's a lot going on out in the community that, yeah, I guess you would like to see more of the kind of connection, because once Elizabeth takes him on, she takes him on. She needs to know he's got a curfew. She needs to know where he is. And that's not easy with a 15-year-old because they are very slippery customers.
They certainly are. And it comes back to what you were saying about the impact of the Vietnam War coming through generation
through the generations.
Yes.
Exactly. Yeah.
So without giving too much of the story away, it is all kind of tied into that storyline. I think we might leave it there. I think we've covered quite a lot, and if I go too much further into your story, I'm actually going to tell everybody the whole story and the plot twists, and that's just not cool. So I'd like to say a very big thank you to you, Amanda. It's been amazing chatting with you today. I've really enjoyed it, and you've certainly given some potential people who, potential writers, some tips and skills in how you craft the stories that you craft. And I look forward to seeing what you write next. I'm interested in meeting the 4 tea ladies and having a read of that. And of course, once our branches, we get back to our full capacity, we'll be hosting more things in our branches. And so we'd love to have you back
Sounds
again
great.
for that.
Thanks for having me.